Eileen Wilson here. This morning, I'm back with Mystery, Magic, and Medicine. And Bella wants in. All right, today we're talking about scientific medicine. It's birth and death. It was among the ancient Greeks that the earliest principles of scientific medicine were formulated. And it was among the ancient Greeks that the first complete separation of religion and medicine took place. It was they who first removed mystery from medicine and made it to a practice, not of magic, not of religion, but of common sense and observation and logical deduction. This step was perhaps the most important one that has ever occurred in the whole long history of medicine. But it was a step forward in medical progress that was not maintained. For as we shall see, although for a brief period the Greeks gave medicine the dignity of a science, it was not held at this level. After the decline of Greece, it again sank into the depths of mystery and magic, from which only after the lapse of centuries was it rescued, revived as a science, and finally nurtured into the medicine of today. A medicine which is giving the people of the world the healthiest period that man has ever known. Remember, he's in 1933. It is sometimes difficult for us who live in this period to comprehend the extreme hazards of life that existed in bygone days. The medicine of savage peoples did little to prolong life or alleviate suffering, other than through the influence upon the mind. This same statement applies in great measure to the medicine of the Grecian days and to that of medieval times. At as late a period as 400 years ago, the average length of life was only 8 years. Today, it's 58 years. Behind those bare figures, for the short length of life in bygone days, is a tragic story of suffering, sorrow, and untimely death. They were the hazards of life born in the resignation of mankind, from which medical science, particularly in the last 75 years, has spared us. One can well give credence to the statement, then, that medical science is the strongest force acting in modern civilization toward human betterment. Modern civilization, as we shall see, is built upon, only made possible, by modern medical science. And the germ of the science, which after centuries was developed into such a beneficent growth, was formed in the years of Grecian civilization, 2,300 years ago. The man who gave us the beginning of science and medicine was a Greek named Hippocrates. Probably no character in all history has, through a single principle, exerted so great an influence upon civilization, upon the conditions of humans, as did he whom we revere as the father of modern medicine. Hippocrates separated medicine from mystery and from religion. From his day forward, mystery, magic, and medicine ceased to be the entire theme of these pages, for he gave us science and medicine. In the days prior to the work of Hippocrates, Grecian medicine was in the hands of a religious organization, the priests of Asclepius, the deified Grecian hero of medicine. The marble temples dedicated to this god were on the country hillsides overlooking the blue Aegean. Olive groves and column porticos made them beautiful sanatoria. Beyond the entry of each was a statue of Asclepius, represented by a bearded man of kindly mien, holding a staff about which twined a snake, the caduceus, the symbol of the physician, even to this day. Beside him was a representation of his daughters, Hygeia and Panacea. Note, at the end of this, I'm going to give you a list of the names of the people that we have mentioned, because I have found, when looking for history, sometimes the best approach is to pick names that lived in the period and had something to offer us. This was the way to go to begin a study of the time. So at the end, I'll give you a list. All right, back to the book. The ill applied for admission to these temples. They slept before the statue of the god. In their dreams, he and his daughters were supposed to minister with divine healing to the worshippers. The following day, the priest would administer such simple medicaments as their knowledge provided, perform rude surgical operations, and prescribe baths and diet. Good and rational medical attention, you would say. Seemingly so, but here was its greatest drawback. These healing priests assumed no responsibility. The gods, so they said, brought disease. The gods, and only the gods, could relieve it. The priests could intercede for divine aid, but they had no incentive to seek the cause of the disease or to search for means for cure and prevention. Under a system of medicine, no progress could be made. For all of its dignified and beautiful surroundings, the ancient Grecian medicine was, in principle at least, no better than that of the savage man. The will of deified heroes had come in to replace the malign influence of spirits. But the change indicated progress of religion, not of medicine. It was Hippocrates who brought about a drastic reform in this temple cult of healing. And his great accomplishment was to relieve the gods of their responsibility for the prevention and treatment of disease, and to place that responsibility where it belonged, squarely upon the shoulders of man. Hippocrates separated medicine from religion, and then for this, now for the first time, independent field, he supplied a philosophy and an ethics that were destined to be the great guiding influence of future medicine. Hippocrates did not create the medical knowledge of his time. The Egyptians, long before the Greeks, had observed symptoms and had found some practical remedies. The medical knowledge of the isolated facts recorded upon their stone tablets often seems fully as great as that which Hippocrates possessed. No doubt it was. But here is the great difference. Hippocrates took these isolated facts, this empirical knowledge, and coordinated it. He made it into a flexible science. Other men had observed the symptoms of disease, but it was Hippocrates who first sat beside his patients and painstakingly sought out symptoms and recorded them. And these symptoms were to him not an end in themselves, but indications of an underlying conditions, a struggle between the patient and the disease which affected him. He took clinical case histories. He founded the bedside method, which was to become the distinguished attribute of all great physicians. There goes Bella. Hippocrates, after wide experience, was able... Bella! Stop it! Bella! Come here. Excuse us, we had to stop Bella from barking. All right. Having recorded the symptoms of his patients, Hippocrates, after wide experience, was able to define and classify diseases. Thus, he founded the art of diagnosis and prognosis. But throughout all his work, his attention was centered upon the patient, not merely upon his symptoms. He dealt with the man as well as with the disease. He kept in his practice the balanced relation between science and art, which was to be the distinguishing quality of all great clinicians in all ages. The descriptions of diseases left by Hippocrates were based on keen and careful observation. They stand today as models of their kind. After his time, such accurate observation was not again made in medicine for over 1,800 years. Hippocrates attempted to turn medical thought away from mere speculation toward accurate observation and common sense. He said, "To know is one thing. Merely to believe one knows is another. To know is science, but merely to believe one knows is ignorance." It was a difficult path that he pointed out for medicine to follow, one that involved intellectual honesty. Only the highest types of men have the intelligence, the independence, the integrity, and the courage to admit their errors and seek, without bias, after the truth. Such are they who have given us modern medicine. But in the years between the days of Hippocrates, the very peak of ancient Grecian culture, and the rise of the modern period, civilization was in decline, and with it, medicine. Within a century after Hippocrates, the decline was already in evidence. Speculation, dogmatization entered the field of medicine to displace observation and clear reasoning. Rival schools sprang into existence. The men of these schools were more interested in making converts to their dogmas than they were to carrying out unsullied the great principles of Hippocrates had designed. 300 years after Hippocrates, Corinth, the light of the Greece, was destroyed by Roman armies. The Grecian medicine was taken into Rome. At that time, the Roman medicine was like that of the Greeks prior to Hippocrates, a matter of the will of the gods. Grecian medicine displaced the Roman religious medicine, but it had already deteriorated, rapidly losing the impetus given to it by the father of medicine. Once only among the Romans was medicine raised to nearly the dignity that Hippocrates had given it. In the period covered by the century before and the century after the beginning of the Christian era, medicine made progress in the hands of such men as Celsus, Dioscorides, Aretius, and Galen. Remember, these names will be spelled correctly at the end. It is probable that Celsus was not a physician, but instead a wealthy patron of science and literature. He compiled an encyclopedic manner the medical knowledge of his time. The centuries later, in the period of the Renaissance, his work was among the first medical books to be printed. They were selected largely because of his elegant literary style. Dioscorides, a Greek army surgeon in the service of the Emperor Nero, owes his fame to the fact that he originated the materia medicae. During his travels with the army, he studied the medicinal herbs of the countries through which he passed. He described more than 600 plants and plant substances, some 90 of which are still in use today. He recorded as an anesthetic for surgical operation the mandragora wine, which was to become famous in medieval medicine. The materia medicae was to remain the authoritative work on this subject up to the 17th century. The next great physician of the Roman period was Aretius. Like Hippocrates, he was essentially a clinical observer, and it is to him that we owe classical accounts of pneumonia, tetanus, and the aura of epilepsy, and the earliest accurate accounts of insanity. It was Galen, the last of great physicians of the Roman period, who was destined for centuries to influence medicine more than any other man. Indeed, the period from his time until the 17th century is essentially one of Galenic domination in medicine. The period from the 17th century onward is the revival of Hippocratic medicine. Galen was unquestionably the most skilled physician of his time, but his lasting fame rests on the fact that he performed experiments to demonstrate the facts of physiology. He essentially formulated an experimental method, which after his time was to lie dormant until the 17th century, when it was revived in a momentous work of Harvey in the demonstration of the circulation of the blood. Galen was a great physician, but he lacked the intellectual honesty and breadth of vision that Hippocrates had possessed. Hippocrates opened the wide road of medical achievement. Galen closed it, and it remained so closed for nearly 14 centuries. Galen was a theorist. He had an answer for every question, an explanation for every phenomenon. Although his logic was good, his premises were often bad. But it was his logic, his dogmatism that appealed so strongly to the men of subsequent centuries. His works, rather than those of Hippocrates, were to become the guiding influence, the final authority in all medical matters until, in fact, it was to become almost a heresy to doubt Galen. Galen and his therapy inclined strongly to medicaments made up of many vegetable ingredients. His polypharmacy in herb doctrine became the much fought over Galenical system of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. We have mentioned the outstanding men of Roman medicine, but not the outstanding contribution of the period. That was sanitation. The Grecian cities were small and remained small because no provision was made for sanitation. In Rome, the streets were paved, sewers and aqueducts were built. Clean streets, pure water, and sewage disposal, three of the main assets of public health, had their first practical application. And this practice, which was destined to be revived centuries later and to influence profoundly the 19th and 20th centuries, fell into disuse after the Roman days. Even in Galen's time, the empire was declining. Many causes have been given for this decline: social, political, economic. But there was also a medical one. For in these centuries, the enervating and deadly malaria had gained a foothold in Italy. Under its influence, the people deteriorated. Plagues and pestilences increased in prevalence. Rome fell to the barbarians, but before it fell, medicine had deteriorated. Vendors of quack remedies had their shops on the streets. The calling of the physician passed into the hands of professional poisoners, courtesans who peddled drugs. Medicine ceased to be a science. It again became mystery and magic. See the list of all the names, many of which I mispronounced, for you to look up if you're interested in this history. Thank you for watching.